Okay, let's do the last video in this series. We're still in the normal distribution section of statistics, but this time it's when values are not ones that lie on those standard deviations either side of the mean, and it's using the NCD function on your graphics calculator. So let's go ahead and use that. So examining the percentage of data between the sections of a sketch can be done by hand, but it's really time consuming. Conveniently, our graphics calculator does that for us. So we're exploring times when it doesn't lie exactly on one of those standard deviations. Little refresher, here is the normal distribution curve and how it's symmetrical around the mean, mu, and these are the percentages. If you haven't watched the video on this section, please make sure you go back and do that. Okay. So this is a tool in our graphics calculator. Please have it handy because you'll need it to answer these questions. And the more often you practice using these, your calculator to type things in, the more familiar you'll come with it, and therefore you'll be able to access them quicker. So using your graphics calculator, I've got my Casio one here. In main menu, stat, then you're choosing distribution, and you'll see F1 is normal. The other one to the far side is binomial, which we get to in some sections of maths, and this NCD, not NPD. The NCD, technically the C, well, it stands for normal cumulative distribution. And cumulative, what does that do? Have you heard that word before? Adding up, to cumulate. And so it's adding up the percentages between the two numbers that you tell the calculator to work out. So on your screen, you'll see these things. If you see something else and they appear as lists, click variable, and so you'll change to this. So don't worry about the data there, the variable. These are the four things that are of interest to us: lower, upper, and these two symbols here. We've seen them before, so I'll just write what they are. This first one here is sigma, and that is the standard deviation value. And then the other one here is mu, that's its letter in the Greek alphabet, and that's mean. You've sometimes seen that as x bar. Right, so coming to answer a question here. So the variable x is normally distributed with mean 40 and standard deviation 10. So there's a lot of extra words there in the sentence, which if you're feeling overwhelmed at the beginning, that's okay. My advice is whenever you get a question like this, extract out the information. So write straight away, what is your mean? Using that mu, and it's 40, and your standard deviation. So to draw a sigma, it's like a letter O, and you just keep going a little bit more when you get back to the top, and that is 10, because they're the numbers that you're going to plug into your calculator. And we have to find these three things, and we need to illustrate our answers. So draw a quick little graph, so I'm going to show you how to do that. So the note here is that finding the probability that a piece of data is between these two numbers. So that's what this means. So that's called a probability statement. P for probability, so that's what we're trying to find, a probability or a proportion that X lies between these numbers. So off the top of my head, that pretending it was a basketball match and that the team scores 40 goals on average per match, and with a standard deviation of 10, we want to find the proportion of the time, or the percentage of the time, where they score between 37 goals and 48 goals. So that's what that means. You need to become familiar with these probability statements if you're heading on with Year 12 General Maths in South Australia. Okay, so here's our probability statement for the first one. So what are we going to put into our calculator? So that's using that stat mode that we've talked about. Looking at the numbers here, the 37 is the lower number, upper is the 48, and the standard deviation and mean. The one thing I do notice here is they're backwards to the order that we would expect them in, and that's always been the case in Casio calculators. Standard deviation comes first, 10, and then the 40. So make sure you're getting them in the right order, and then you press EXE, execute, like your equals button, and what do we get? We get this number here. So you're interested in just the p-value. Don't worry so much about this z. Well, just in case you are interested, that's how many standard deviations away from the mean it is. But you don't need to worry about that. The number we're interested in is this P, the proportion number. So the answer to that question would be 0.406, or as a percentage, you could multiply that by 100 and get 40.6%. Make sure you read your question and see if it's asking you for the proportion or probability, or if it's asking for a percentage. But how do you write this down? What bookwork do you need to show your teacher or your examiner that you know what you're doing? And this is what you need to write. So the 4 inputs that you put into your calculator, you need to write down. You don't necessarily have to write the whole word lower. We'd be happy for you to write lower is 37, upper is 48. And then you do need to write the symbols for sigma, standard deviation, is 10, and mu is 40. And then the final answer you need to write is the p-value. So p is equal to 0.406. If that was rounded, the 2 types of equals that you can use for approximately equal to are the equals with a dot top and bottom, or wavy equals. You use them if you've rounded. Now, also said to illustrate your answer. So how do you do that? I'd like a sketch of the bell curve. So it's really quick and simple. You draw the bottom line, draw yourself a curve, put the mean on. Always put the mean on, please. What was the mean? It was 40. And now let's have a think about what range we had here between 37 and 48. Where are those numbers in relation to 40? 37 is to the left. You can look at the standard deviation to decide how far to the left. Just put a little line there. Or I suppose we can write 37 and up to 48. Again, that's, let's say, about there. Then you need to create a section of area and you give it a quick little shade like that. That's what it means to illustrate. I need the curve, the mean, and then the numbers of interest, and shade it in, because it's saying that 40% is that section coloured in. Let's do 2 more. What if it's greater than 45? How do you put that into your calculator? So I might actually draw the picture for this one. Sometimes it's really helpful to create the picture in your mind first of what you're doing, because then you know what you're solving. That's the curve you draw. What was the mean? It was 40. So where is 45? To the right of that. And how far? Well, one standard deviation is 10, so it's perhaps not a whole standard deviation. So it's here. And we want greater than 45. So we're actually after the area to the right of that. Oh, we should put that number 45 on. So that's what we're solving. I wonder what percentage that would be. If 50% is the whole area to the right, it's got to be a number less than 50. So let's see what it is. So the numbers that you put in here, lower is 45 because we're going greater than 45. The upper boundary. So essentially you want infinity. You want all the way to the end of time. Take into account all of those numbers, please. However, we can't write infinity or type that into our calculator. How do we do that? We write 10 to the power of a really big number is what we've got written there. So essentially you're doing 10 to the power of 98. You might ask, why not 99? When the graphics calculators first came out, some of them had some issues when we went 10 to the power of 99. So as teachers, we started teaching 10 to the 98, and that seemed to work all the time. But how do you type that in? Well, you could write 10 to the power of 98, but I'd like you to use this button here, the EXP button, which you will find if you're on a calculator, right down the bottom near your EXE button, near your equals button. So type that one in and then type 98 and hit enter, and it will come up with the 1 as well. And then the other 2 numbers, it's probably saved it in your calculator from the previous question that you did, the 10 and the 40. And then you hit execute and you'll get your value, which is 0.309. That's rounded. Tend to round to 2 or 3 decimal places. Check your question, it might tell you which one. And that was that. It's about 31%, and that was the shaded area. So remember to make sure you've done the shading section that we've done on the previous screen. What about one that's less than, though? So the values that we put in for that, having a read here. Oh, I think my picture's over the top of part of it. So the upper boundary here is 26 for our upper, but this time round we're going to negative infinity. So our picture for that would be, draw a sketch, put on the mean. The mean is 40. Where is 26? It's less than 40. How far along? The standard deviation is 10. So that subtracting 10 off from 40 takes us to 30. So we're less than that. So we're at 26. And so the shaded area for this one would be about there. So we're going off to negative infinity. How do you essentially write negative 10 to the power of 98? That negative button that you're after is the one on a Casio down the bottom. Don't use the subtract, use the little minus sign in the brackets for that. And then the rest will stay the same in terms of the standard deviation and the mean. And your upper is 26. So that is the upper end. And then the lower end is negative infinity. And the answer for that is very small, about 8.1%, or that's the proportion or the probability is what you would need. And that's what appears on your screen there. And so that's the p-value that you write. Remembering again to make sure that you've drawn your sketch, putting on your 26 there, less than with your mean. Always making sure you do a sketch, please. And listing what you did, your lower, upper, your standard deviation and your mean, writing those four values, your answer and your sketch. Okay, thank you for working with me through these problems. There's the section to do now. Pass this on to a friend if they need to know it too. Subscribe to the channel, give it a thumbs up. Thank you for joining me.